and Alistair Becker-King. Thanks for watching. I'm Darrell Green. Good night.
What planet is she on? Philomena unlocks the mystery of human civilization, and she's got many questions to ask. Watch Conk on Earth on BBC iPlayer. There's more satirical comedy with a new series of The Skewer on BBC Sounds. Stream and download your favourite BBC podcasts, radio stations and music all in one place. Get the BBC Sounds app on your smartphone or tablet.
Warning, all new RuPaul's Drag Race UK may cause intense eye-popping,
Bring on the queens!
extreme jaw-dropping. You want more of this?
Much wetter.
RuPaul's Drag Race UK. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Time for Friday's Newsnight, now on BBC Two with Kirsty Walk.
For too long in this country, we've indulged in a fight over redistribution. Now we need to focus on growth, not just how we tax and spend. We won't apologise for managing the economy in a way that increases prosperity and living standards.
But the markets aren't buying it. As the pound continued to plummet towards parity with the dollar, will today's radical economic announcements be seen as credible? Kwasi Kwarteng says this is a rethink and a reset. It feels like an economic earthquake. I'll be asking the newly minted Chief Secretary of the Treasury when this plan is going to yield the promised growth of 2.5%.
I think these measures will start to have a positive effect straight away, but I'm thinking about this over a 1, 2, 3 year period.
And what does the shadow business minister make of tax cuts across the board and the end of the orthodoxy of redistribution? And with our trio of top political commentators, we'll be gauging the chances of Liz Truss's big gamble triumphing or tanking. And from the politics of the 21st century to the politics of the 16th, and the death of 2 times Booker winner Hilary Mantel, who brought Thomas Cromwell to life for millions of readers. Good evening. The new Chancellor announced that today's massive reimagining of the economy was exactly the right thing to do. From the cut in the basic rate of income tax to the abolition of the 45p top tax band, except in Scotland, from raising the threshold in stamp duty to reversing the increase in national insurance and abandoning the planned rise in corporation tax, as well as ending the cap on bankers' bonuses, we don't yet really know if the measures will add up to driving growth to 2.5%, but the reaction from the markets was far from positive. Today's announcement will put more money in most people's pockets, but as this graph shows, it is undoubtedly the very richest who benefit most, and that green bar shows it's thanks in large part to the abolition of the highest rate of tax. So what are Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng up to, and will it work? Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Chancellor.
Thank you. We need a new approach for a new era, focused on growth.
A bold and long overdue bid to kickstart the British economy? Or a gamble of historic proportions that will crash the economy? Questions left hanging in the air as the new Chancellor unveiled the biggest single round of tax cuts in 50 years, to be paid for initially through borrowing. A vital step to promote economic growth, according to an unapologetic Chancellor, after outlining tax cuts that will overwhelmingly benefit the better off.
For too long in this country, we've indulged in a fight over redistribution. Now we need to focus on growth, not just how we tax and spend. We won't apologise for managing the economy in a way that increases prosperity and living standards.
Labour warned that the government was acting irresponsibly.
The value of sterling has fallen. We can see it, half his colleagues suspect it, and financial markets know it. The verdict is clear. When it comes to the economy, this Tory leadership do not know what they are doing.
And a guarded response from some Tories.
A divided Conservative Party gave a divided response to Kwasi Kwarteng. At last we're Conservatives again, came the cry from some quarters. But in the corridors round here, there were other Conservative MPs with their heads in their hands saying, this is an almighty roll of the dice, and if it goes wrong, there will be grave consequences.
Comparisons were being drawn with a Conservative tax-cutting budget of 1972, a dash for growth which led to the barber boom and an overheated economy. Tax cuts a decade and a half later and an overheating economy again.
And I've brought down the higher rates of tax too.
A former Treasury Minister who raised mild concerns in the Commons today is watching carefully.
Well, the new Prime Minister and the Chancellor need to be respected at this time. They've won, they are the people who are in charge, and they are making those decisions now. So those circumstances were different, but you're broadly right. Yes, the cost of borrowing is an important factor and conditions how open we should be to increasing or reducing that level of borrowing. And that comes down to the market's overall confidence in public finances as a whole.
But for one former Cabinet Minister, the Chancellor was right to act radically.
It has been an absolutely enormous commitment to cutting taxes, only equalled by the enormous commitment to improving incentives to businesses to grow. So this is a huge supply-side reform agenda being set out by the Chancellor. And obviously it's making a great bet, a strategic bet on economic growth. And that is in everybody's interest.
The Liberal Democrats believe the Chancellor has embarked on a dangerous step.
I think it's a real danger that because there's no proper economic plan from the Conservatives, that our economy is going to suffer real problems. I think with the reckless borrowing, funding tax cuts for the rich, we'll see interest rates, mortgage rates go up for people who are struggling to get by already. So I'm really worried that struggling families out there will be hit by this.
A challenge across the floor, laying down the gauntlet. Prime Minister and Chancellor taking on established thinking.
Nick Watt-Well, the Chancellor, is self-evidently entirely focused on delivering growth. He has a target, 2.5%, but crucially, he was short on detail about timescale, despite the Office of Budget Responsibility's offer to make him an independent baseline economic forecast. Add to that the money to pay for the health and social care reforms due to be paid for by the increase in NI will now come from borrowing, which ultimately we all pay for. So that promise of growth is crucial. Will it be delivered? Here's our economics editor Ben Chew at the Newsnight wall. Ben.
Kirsty, these tax cuts are large on a historical scale. Last night we showed you this, that the corporation and national insurance tax cuts alone were set to make it the largest giveaway since that Nigel Lawson budget in 1988. Well, look at this. Add in the surprise income tax cuts announced today, and it's only beaten by that ill-fated 1972 budget that Nick mentioned. So why is the new Chancellor doing it? Well, he says he expects it to boost GDP growth, not just today, but permanently. So here's the key question. Will it? This is something economists have long debated. There's no simple answer. But what we can show is that there is no obvious relationship between the prosperity of a developed economy and the amount it raises in tax. Look at this. The side scale shows the tax take as a share of GDP. The UK is around mid-table among rich countries, taking around 36% of GDP in tax. The bottom scale shows income per head of population. Again, the UK is around mid-table at around $50,000 a year. If lower government tax takes led automatically to greater growth and prosperity, you'd expect to see a downward sloping pattern here, heading towards the bottom right-hand corner, with states with a lower national tax take having higher incomes. But you don't always. Germany has a higher tax take than the UK, but is also richer. And the same is true of Canada. And look at France. It's also richer than the UK, but has a much higher tax take, more than 50% of GDP.
It's difficult to look at the UK's experience versus other European economies like France, Germany, the Netherlands, who all have considerably higher tax burdens than the UK and have all experienced faster economic growth in recent times than the UK. It's hard to look at that and conclude that what's really holding the UK back is its tax burden.
Liz Truss has recently argued that there has been too much focus on redistribution through the tax system in UK politics, and that this has come at the expense of growth. The implication is that lowering taxes on those on high incomes will boost the size of the national economic pie in a way that ultimately helps everyone. But it's not in fact clear lower tax rates on the wealthy will boost overall growth. Consider this. The side scale shows average GDP growth per head. The bottom scale shows how the top tax rate has changed in those countries. So you can see a big reduction in the UK's rate over that period, down by around 50 percentage points. But UK growth in the middle of the pack, around 2.5% a year. No better than countries without big rate reductions in recent decades. Indeed, comprehensive cross-country analysis by IMF economists in 2014 found that redistribution appears generally benign in terms of its impact on growth. Only in extreme cases is there some evidence that it may have direct negative effects on growth.
I think it's unlikely that these tax cuts are going to harm growth, but I don't think that they're going to be revolutionary and overturn decades of built-up capital, skills, business expertise that the UK has, its institutional structure, its policy framework, all those things you can't just change overnight, and they're perhaps more important for determining the UK's medium-term path.
To be clear, what we're looking at here is the economic rationale for these tax cuts on the government's own terms, boosting growth. To put it mildly, the economic evidence cannot be said to unambiguously support that rationale. Kirsty.
Thanks, Ben. Well, earlier this evening, I spoke to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Chris Philp. I began by asking him when the Chancellor's new economic plan would begin to deliver growth.
Well, it's a plan that will deliver over the medium term. We think it'll start having an effect straight away, but of course it'll take time for businesses to make investment decisions and choose, we hope, to locate in the UK. It'll take time for that to be fully felt, but the objective is to raise our GDP growth rate by 1% compared to where it is now, up to about 2.5%.
So tell me what you think the medium term is that's going to get you to 2.5%.
So I think, well, look, I mean, clearly we're in a turbulent economic time coming out of COVID and with the war in Ukraine. I think these measures will start to have a positive effect straight away, but I'm thinking about this over a 1, 2, 3 year period because some of these decisions take time to make.
But let's look at the short term. Look at the market reaction today. That's a good indicator. 3% fall in the pound today, higher borrowing costs. The markets are spooked.
Well, in terms of the debt and the borrowing costs, we should just keep in mind that the UK has the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. The money we're paying, the interest rates we're paying on our bonds are around about the same levels as the United States. And in addition to that, the Chancellor is going to be setting out in the relatively near future a medium-term fiscal plan that will make sure our debt to GDP ratio is falling across the medium term.
But right now, the pound is at a 37-year low against the dollar. It is heading for parity. Do you think there is a risk that you'll crash the economy?
No, I don't. Quite the reverse. This is a plan that will deliver growth. But on the currency question, it's worth observing that the dollar has been strong against a range of currencies, the yen, the euro and ours. The euro, of course, is around about parity anyway.
You don't think the moves in the market today matter?
Look, I didn't say that, but I think, look, they're short-term moves, and this is a medium to long-term plan, and I'm confident that these moves will deliver growth. And it's not just the tax, it's the deregulation and it's the infrastructure and energy investments as well.
Why did you tweet so excitedly at 10:17 this morning? Great to see sterling strengthen on the back of the new UK growth plan. It was a momentary uptick, wasn't it?
Yeah, sterling moved around, and what I said earlier is that the long-term plan, the medium-term plan, is what matters, and our plan for growth, taxes, infrastructure investment, deregulation will deliver that growth. But that was an
immediate reaction. You thought it was very important at that very moment, that sterling strengthened. You thought that was an indication that your plan, the growth plan, was good. So when the markets then fell back massively, that presumably has to be a reaction to the growth plan. It's not one without the other.
Look, I think it was an interesting move, which I responded to. But what matters is whether or not this growth plan is the right plan for the economy. And I'm absolutely categorically convinced that making sure our tax rates are competitive, making sure that regulation is light touch, and making sure that we're investing in infrastructure and energy are the right things to do to grow our whole economy, benefiting everybody, and making sure we can get those tax revenues to fund public services.
Lord Macpherson, the former Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, said that he can't remember in any of the 60 fiscal events that he worked on over 31 years generating as strong a market reaction as today's. That must give you pause for thought.
Look, this is a new approach, right? It's a new approach.
Untested.
It's a new approach that is designed to drive growth, which will ultimately deliver for the whole United Kingdom.
Kwasi Kwarteng said today, for too long we've indulged in a fight over redistribution. Where is the evidence that being redistributive is some kind of barrier to growth?
I think what that's a reference to is the fact we have had very high tax rates for people on higher incomes. I mean, you remember back in 2010, Gordon Brown put it all the way up, right in the last days of his time in office, up to 50%. And it was then 45% for a time. When you have tax rates that are that high, it does drive people away. It does deter investment. So we're not interested in the politics of envy. We want to make sure that taxes are cut for everybody to encourage people and companies to come and invest here. And by the way, the reaction that I'm the reaction that I'm most interested in is the reaction from the CBI and the Federation of Small Businesses, both of whom very strongly welcomed these measures. And of course, it's their members that are going to be creating these higher paid jobs of the future.
I mean, you say you're not interested in the politics of envy, but it is a fact that the richer you are, the more you've immediately benefited from the tax cuts. It is a fact.
Well, I think you've got to view the whole package together, and the removal of the 45p tax band is about 1/20th, around about 5% of the fiscal value of the whole thing. You've got to bear in mind there have been a number of other measures this year. For example, the £1,200 of help directed specifically at people on lower incomes to help out with the cost of living challenges. We've increased that national insurance threshold, so people on lower incomes now pay not only virtually no income tax, but also virtually no national insurance. And those are measures particularly designed to help people on lower incomes, and that's right.
Mel Stride, who ran Rishi Sunak's campaign but is the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, says to go ahead with the plans without an accompanying OBR report is like flying blind. Why are you flying blind?
Well, we're not flying blind. There were costings of the policies published on page 26 of the Blue Book.
But no OBR.
And the Chancellor has made clear that the OBR will be publishing a full normal scorecard before the end of this calendar year, so in the next sort of 2 or 3 months, in order to fully reflect the impact of these policies and indeed others that we may announce in the coming couple of months.
Julian Smith, the former Northern Ireland Secretary-in-Chief Whip, says, in a statement with many positive enterprise measures, this huge tax cut for the very rich at a time of national crisis and real fear and anxiety among low-income workers and citizens is wrong.
Well, I don't agree. The removal of the 45p tax band is only 1/20th of the total package. This is a broadly based package that benefits everybody.
Last quote from somebody. Paul Johnson of the IFS described this as a big gamble. You do accept it's a big gamble?
No, the real gamble here is continuing with unsustainably high levels of tax that would stifle innovation and deter investment. This plan for growth isn't a gamble, it's a necessity. It'll benefit everyone here, deliver higher wages, and ultimately it'll sustainably fund our critical public services like health and education.
Chris Philp, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, with me now is Labour's Seema Malhotra, the Shadow Business Minister. Seema Malhotra, thank you very much for joining us. Presumably lowering the basic rate of tax is something that Labour welcomes.
We'll certainly be supporting the lowering of the basic rate, and we've also supported the reversal of the national insurance rise, which we fought hard in Parliament to stop earlier this year, and yet we saw Kwasi Kwarteng support that. But I think what was really striking today in Parliament was the admission effectively of 12 years of failure of what the Conservatives have been doing. And Kwasi Kwarteng and his colleagues failed to connect the fact that we've got high taxes because we've had low growth. And I think it is incredibly important they are now on the same page as we have been, which is that tackling low growth is the most important thing for how we rebuild our economy to ensure prosperity for our citizens.
And would Labour reverse the abolition of the 45p higher rate?
Well, I'm hoping very much that that won't actually go through, because I think you've heard today as well from some of the Conservatives that the
let's
additional rate.
Let's just say it does go through. Let's just say it does go through. My point is it may go through and it may not, but I'm talking about Labour. And would Labour reverse that rate rise to from 45?
Well, let me answer that, because the point I was making is that it isn't clear and it isn't a done deal that it's actually going to go through, and we hope that it won't, because...
But hang on.
If we can
it's about policy and direction, isn't it? And what I'm saying to you is, what would you do?
And what I'm saying to you is that the reason why we're against it, because I want to make this point, is because it's effectively a £2 billion giveaway on the backs of taxpayers who will be paying. And what we're saying is that that should not go through now. If it does go through, well, let's see where we are, because we need to look at what happens in the round, and certainly we will be laying out what we will be doing in our own time in terms of future tax policy as well.
But it's fair to say the rich pay more tax. I mean, they just do.
Well, I think what you've seen today in some of the graphs that you've already shown is, whilst the Chancellor might want to ignore distribution, if you've got 45% of the giveaways from the Chancellor today going to the top 5% richest richest in the country, and you've got 12% going to the poorest 50%, is that really the basis of any plan for equal growth across the country?
But you're not going to reverse it. Essentially what you're saying is you're not going to reverse it.
No, I'm saying that we're going to see what happens in Parliament first, whether there's any change with the government, and certainly then we'll be laying out our plans after that.
So, growth is something that the UK has struggled with actually long before this government came in. We've had traditionally low growth. So therefore, focusing on growth...
Let's be clear, on average it was 2% growth under Labour.
But if you look at the German economy, if you look at the French economy, you know, they're stronger. They've just generally had stronger growth. And what I was going to say was, growth means more jobs, it means more skills, it means higher wages. So therefore, presumably you do commend this determination to get to 2.5%.
Well, what I would say is absolutely. And why has it taken the government so long? They've had, in fact, 7 plans for growth that have failed. If you want to go back and look at their 7 plans for growth. And what we have said is, if you're going to have a plan for growth, it's got to be a proper plan. Even today wasn't a proper plan. Today was a set of tax cuts that are supporting the wealthiest in our society. And if Kwasi Kwarteng can explain how increasing bankers' bonuses in Canary Wharf or elsewhere will help a constituent of his or a constituent of mine to be more, to be better off in this really difficult time with the cost of living crisis facing our families and businesses, you know, that will be an explanation for what the impact is going to be of what he's done.
Just very briefly, let's stick with business. Just very briefly. Abandoning the rise in corporation tax, you would agree that is good for business?
Well, actually, we disagree with some of the proposals for corporation tax, simply because what businesses have also said is that they need high skills, they need investment, they need a plan. What they've been talking to me about, and what they and if you go and talk to businesses across the country, is the need for certainty, clarity and long-term planning. And measures like our climate investment pledge was looking at over a 10-year plan for growth that is looking for a transition to green growth as well, a vision for the future of our economy. That's what businesses have said that they want. And there isn't evidence that cutting the corporation tax will actually lead to investment, because we've got low growth as well as low taxes.
Seema Malhotra, thank you very much for joining us. As discussed, today's tax cuts benefit the wealthiest in society the most, but they'll also put more money in the pockets of millions struggling to make ends meet. Anna Collinson has been to Birmingham Northfield, a constituency the Conservatives won from Labour at the last election, to get a sense of how today's announcements have landed for people there.
There's one of our products, which is a Cherry Orchard fresh English port loin. Gone up 25–30%. Once your pork goes up, one of your big products from your pork is your bacon. Gone up considerably. But what we have seen a big increase on is sausage. Previously, 12 months ago, you know, it was £3 a bag, 2 for a £5, absolutely bargain. The rusk alone has gone up 70% in a year. So now, unfortunately, they're £4 a pack or 2 for £6.50.
Pete has been serving Northfield in Birmingham for 7 years and has noticed a big change in what people can now afford.
The big customers, used to come along and fill the freezers up once a month. They don't exist now. People are living literally week by week.
Do you think the government's approach of tax cuts is the best way to tackle the cost of living crisis?
I think tax cuts are the answer. The people around here will see a big difference. Anything positive that's happening which is going to benefit them, yes. Northfield is a very hard area, and what they've got in the pocket they will spend. So if they are getting more in the pocket, I think it's a good way going forward with tax cuts and benefits, yes.
Good choice with the pumpkin spice. So all you need to do is pop what you can in the app, press the blue button twice and then scan your card on the reader. And that's you all done.
Down the road, Lucy runs a bakery where customers pay what they can rather than a set price.
See you later.
She's already doing everything possible to keep her overheads down.
I have been known to work in the dark as much as I can. Obviously, I do have to be able to see that things are going on, but there have been times when I've looked around me and I've thought, why is it so dark? And it's because I'm just so used to not putting lights on now and being mindful about electricity.
While Lucy welcomes any extra money for her and her customers, she believes much of the government's growth plan, such as the cancelled corporation tax hike, won't help.
These measures are not necessarily brought in to help small and micro businesses such as this. I think they'll be helpful for larger corporations, which is fantastic for them, but I do feel a little bit suspicious as if small businesses are never on the agenda and we're maybe being pushed out as an entity, which would be really sad because I don't want to live in a world of chains.
I think they need to focus on the working class people first, what can be done immediately so that we see results imminently rather than waiting for it to trickle down and then potentially help us.
Got 2 Ledbury loaves for you here.
Thank you.
2 cruffins.
Perfect, thank you.
Kira is on maternity leave and says money is a constant worry. She can't understand why the wealthiest are going to benefit the most from the Chancellor's tax cuts.
It's a common theme that the rich always seem to get richer when any of these things are announced. It would be nice if there was a focus on the more working class people, but I suppose at this point we've just got to take what we can get. I mean, I think we've just got to put our trust in the politicians. I don't think many people do have a lot of faith in them, but there's nothing that we can do to change it.
You've now had time to process the mini-budget. What do you want the government to know?
I think it would be really nice to see some change for working people, hard-working people that go out to work every day. Some people that come into this shop have 3 or 4 jobs and yet they still can't make ends meet. I'd like to see a little bit less survival and a little bit more living for normal working people.
That report by Anna Collinson. Well, one thing all those in the House of Commons could agree on today was that this is not business as usual. For 12 successive years, Conservative governments have always wanted to show that any tax changes will benefit more the poor than the rich. Well, now all that is out the window. To try to make some sense of where the party leaders go from here, I'm joined by Stephen Bush from the Financial Times, Poppy Trowbridge, who was an advisor to Philip Hammond when he was Chancellor during Theresa May's government, and also by Kate Andrews from The Spectator. We can start by looking at tomorrow morning's front pages, and we begin with the Mail. The Mail, at last, a true Tory budget. New dash for growth and biggest boost for 50 years, says the Mail. The Times, Truss's great tax gamble, biggest cuts package for 50 years, boost for highest earners. Sterling falls amid borrowing fears. And a picture there of Harry Mantell, who we'll come to a little later. FT weekend, pound slumps below $1.09 after Kwarteng's £45 billion tax cut gamble. And then we go on to the Guardian. A budget for the rich, super rich laughing all the way to the actual bank. And that's the last page that we have. So let me just turn straight to Poppy Trowbridge. You were at the Treasury under Phil Hammond. Are the moves today anything that Conservative government would have countenanced?
Absolutely not, but it probably should have been done back then when borrowing rates were much lower and investment was really needed. But what we saw today was a budget that tried to do a lot of things at once, and I think we will see the layers of budget crammed into one sort of chipboard package that we got today. It was a budget for business in many ways. It was also a budget for this Conservative administration to speak directly to its base and say that they're different.
I was going to say, though, this idea of low tax, low corporation tax, low stamp duty, these are all very traditionally Conservative measures.
And that was it's very familiar to me, having worked with both of these, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, when I was in the government. They are very ideological. They have been fairly consistent in that. They are sort of true Tories, how they would define themselves, and I think they're trying to show their base and the public that.
Now, Stephen, does this give Labour a bit of a problem, how it responds to this?
Well, it doesn't. I think we saw earlier on this programme that it puts them in this slightly difficult position of having to, instead of arguing, oh, look, you've got low growth, this is why you have these high taxes, they're instead going, you've got low growth, but oh God, we're going to have to sort of admit that we would have to raise this. But equally, it's probably always a good position if you're an opposition party for a government to be having quite a big gamble, because there's a good chance this blows up in the government's face.
Well, but the market reaction, the immediate market reaction, we actually soften towards them next week.
I think, I'm not going to make predictions about what the market's going to do next week. And really what matters is not where are the markets next week, it's what happens if you are even one of the beneficiaries of these tax cuts, what happens when you have to remortgage. So a third of all fixed rate mortgages are up for renewal by the end of 2023. So that's going to be a big political moment, right?
Okay, Andrews, this is the kind of budget the Institute of Economic Affairs and the right of the party has been looking for a long time. What are your concerns about it? Are you wholeheartedly thinking this is a kind of hoopla moment?
No, I'm not exactly celebrating. Look, I think Liz Truss and her government have correctly targeted the tax burden as a real problem in the UK, and they felt that a 70-year high was unsustainable. But what continues to be missing from Trussonomics during her campaign and now is the other side of that equation, that if you want to cut taxes, that can certainly help to spur on growth. But the idea that £45 billion worth of tax cuts are going to simply pay for themselves is for the birds. And that's why we see today that borrowing is expected to go up by £70 billion. This is a Conservative Party that has stopped worrying and learned to love the deficit. That's another huge ideological shift. And I think that missing part of Trussonomics, exactly how you fill in these black holes in the public finances, and big ones too, is what's missing from that argument.
So they were just taking a risk with this amount of borrowing at this stage. Massive risk.
They're taking another massive risk as well, which is that there won't be another big shock to the economy. We've had a financial one, we've had an energy one, we've had a health one. What if there is another one? Where will that emergency injection of cash come from? They have maxed out the credit card.
Yes, and even this one, what Kate is saying, will not pay for itself.
2.5% growth is the bare minimum that they need to generate. But I suspect what we will see is some recalibration in 3 years' time, 4 years' time.
Yes, but the recalibration 3 or 4 years' time, when I spoke to Chris Philp earlier, I was saying, well, what's the medium term this is going to yield? And he goes, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. There's very little because they don't want to be boxed in. But this idea that this might not deliver anything like 2.5% growth for another 3 years, surely, Kate, that is a massive problem.
Well, it's very rare that you get a government that's willing to make itself so vulnerable by setting a very ambitious, very specific target, which this government has done, 2.5% growth. And, we are getting some independent forecasts out today trying to catch up with the numbers, which do think, broadly speaking, the consensus is that tax cuts will help spur growth. And oftentimes, tax cuts are underplayed and undervalued. They are a supply-side reform. They are a growth mechanism. But the idea that especially as we may well be in recession right now, these tax cuts alone get us to 2.5% growth is not something that the consensus is arguing. Now, we must remember, although today was a mega budget in reality,